Energy Star. I was under the assumption for most of my life that Energy Star was a company, like J.D. Power and Associates. Like they test your refrigerator and, wow, look, it runs greener than other refrigerators. No, I didn't realize it's a part of the Department of Energy rating system. And that, in fact, if any government institution wants to buy a piece of equipment, it must come with an Energy Star rating. Energy Star rating means that your piece of equipment runs 30% more efficiently than a competitive product. It's interesting how most all industries have the Energy Star label. I don't know what they're competing against anymore. And then they changed it to standards. Now they'll put a fixed price, it's a standard, you just need to beat it by 30%. Well, the GAO, probably the only piece of government that makes sense, the Government Accountability Office, decided to do a test to see if the Energy Star program was worth anything. And so they decided to submit products. They just took labels off of non-Energy Star fridges and sent the specs in for testing and evaluation and said, our fridge runs cleaner than anything else, and they get an email back saying, you're approved. And they're like, okay, well, let's see how far we can take this. And so they submitted a design with a space heater, tall space heater, with a feather duster taped to the front of it, and said, our feather duster space heater beats all other feather duster space heaters in its category. And the Department of Energy sent them an email and says, is this true? And they sent back an email, yes. And they sent back an email, you're approved. And then they said, no, GAO was like, okay, this is too good. This is just, this is our jobs for the next 20 years, insured right now. They created, this is no joke, a 2-stroke powered alarm clock. Approval, Department of Energy, Energy Star rated. Better than most 2-stroke alarm clocks in its field. And so they just said, okay, well, we'll just do one more thing and we'll see if it goes. I don't know if you know what fracking and cracking is. It's when you bury down deep and you get oil and gasoline. And in the process, you can also create geothermal plants. A geothermal plant, you have to drill down about a 2-mile bore. They're multi-million-dollar operations. You need lots of techs and soil engineers on site. They created a geothermal-powered bed, and it got approval. They didn't have any designs or specs. They just said they had it. And so next time you see Energy Star on a product, you remember that feather duster attached to that space heater. Oh, do I have a number 4? Okay. Number 4 is the Endangered Species Act. I love animals. I would make a joke like, oh, they're so tasty. No, animals are cool. The Endangered Species Act is not cool. That is not a cool piece of regulation. The ESA has these wonderful words in its summary saying, by all means necessary. You don't want your federal government saying by all means necessary and then judging the validity of their actions based on those words. The federal government has 1,870 species listed. You think they're all in America? No, they're not even within the jurisdiction of our country. I just took a safety training class at UC Berkeley's Earthquake Engineering Lab. It was a very informative safety class. I had to click through and answer questions about a 43 separate slideshow presentation, all of which were about the harvest mouse that lives on the premises and the clapper rail crane, which also lives on the premises, which this is one of the only places in the world they exist. So instead of learning about how to get my hand cut off by a belt saw or something else, I was learning about not feeding the feral cats as if I wanted to feed feral cats. That's why I'm going to work. Because they eat the eggs of the clapper rail and they hunt the harvest mouse. The ESA has delisted to date 40 species from the Endangered Species Act. Guess how many were miscounted? Almost half. They were put on there by accident, but they were counted literally among the successes. Look at how much our act has done. We've taken 20 species off of the list. 3 of them were species of kangaroo. For any of those who are good at geography, kangaroo do not live in North America. 3 of them were birds that live in Palau. All miscounted, by the way, but they don't count as the official miscounted. Alligators in Florida, not because they were endangered, but because they misestimated the threat upon the species. They're doing fine. They just didn't accurately assess the threat upon the species. But it's counted, again, as a success, a delisting. You go down the thing, now we get into trees and shrubs and plants, most of which were just moved from hiking trail areas and replanted elsewhere on a hillside. But my favorites, the ones that you've heard the most about, the huge successes, the greatest successes, the spotted owl of the Pacific Northwest and the gray whale of the Pacific Ocean. Now, the spotted owl of the Pacific Northwest is a fantastic case. You're going to love this. They determined that the spotted owl of the Pacific Northwest lives in old-growth forests. That means forests have never been cut down for logging. By the way, in case no one's followed up, we have 20% more forests now than our first assessments back in 1920. And we have 3 times more trees in the continental United States. And the reason why is because we divert water from where it's plentiful to where it's not, and we grow trees, and we grow plants, and we grow trees for paper. We have a lot of trees, by the way, so don't worry about logging. Just want to put that out. So they determined that the numbers of spotted owls are decreasing in old-growth forests. And so they put them on the list. And it was actually one of the causes du jour of the list. But what they didn't realize when they wrote it is that spotted owls are being very happy in second-growth forests and third-growth forests. They were fine, but they were classified as endangered in the first-growth forests. So instead of the government reassessing that, say, oh, the species is fine, which they eventually did because it's been delisted, they said, well, now the second and third-growth forests are off limits because of this endangered species. The gray whale. For those of you who haven't been following, we no longer use oil-filled lamps to power this room. We no longer use baling to create corsets for women. The gray whale was put on the list just because the last assessments they had back in the 1890s listed them as being, quote, hard to find. The gray whale population actually come back almost in full force. Some estimates put it over full force than what we probably had back in the 1800s. But it was put on as a success story. Again, nothing to do with the ESA. They were delisted because it was a mistake just to put it on there. But you still hear the Save the Whales campaign. The funny thing is, it's sort of a counterintuitive law, because if you think about the ESA, what it does is it makes you basically a prisoner on your own land, and I want to explain this real carefully. If you saw a clapper rail on your territory and you knew it was endangered, you wouldn't care. If there was no law, who cares? It's a creature, it survives and lives in this area. What you're afraid of is a federal investigator finds out that the clapper rail landed on your piece of property. It instigates us to do this thing called kill it and bury it. And I'm serious, because we're not afraid of the animal, we're afraid of the feds on your land taking it away from you. Again, without compensation and almost without warning. I mean, it is one of those counterintuitive laws. And I think my favorite part of the law, and this sort of goes back to the spotted owl, is imagine that on this side of the stage, spotted owls love to live here. I mean, it is just their home. They dig this place. And over here on this side is our stage with Mr. Gino. Spotted owls don't really like Richard Gino, and they don't like to live over here. So guess where the ESA makes it illegal to build? In the place where they don't like to live because they're scarce. But over here is totally cool. Because yes, in some places, and again, a species can be endangered in one state, but not in another where it's plentiful. Again, the same species. ESA, I can't get enough of it. Every single case is just a joke. The last one on the ESA list, I love this one, is called the Hoover something something. It's a tiny little plant, it's a weed, you wouldn't know it from any other weed, right? It is delisted and scheduled as recovering at the same time. It's delisted in the delisted column, but it's also on the recovering section. It is a phantom plant, again, only available in a federal program to be double listed. Now I'm going to get to the third. These are the big boys right here. These are the ones that are really, really, really competing for your time. Portland, Oregon, last year, 2 years ago, 2009, with a very poorly named mayor, Samuel Adams, because he's nothing like the Sam Adams of the day, or the beer. Sam Adams, along with the city council, passed one of those wonderful laws that only in San Francisco, which is true, only San Francisco had it before, but it's the gender reassignment surgeries for public sector workers in the city. Nothing wrong with gender reassignment surgery. I think it's a wonderful thing. Don't do it with my tax dollars. Portland, Oregon decided to create a program, which they've passed, and unanimously, there was no dissenting opinion in Portland, that they will pay up to $75,000 to help someone do this. Surgery generally costs around $50,000, but they'll pay $75,000. Any public employee. Now, I couldn't imagine many people will dip into this. It's not a common event. But still, it's a law on the books that the citizens of Portland must deal with. San Francisco is they'll pay up to whatever the cost, 85%, as long as you have an in-house healthcare insurance package. Would any of you vote to take away tax money to pay for gender reassignment surgery for people who couldn't get real jobs and work for the city of San Francisco or Portland? No. Rhetorical. You don't need to answer that. Okay, we already talked about it. Someone brought up vineyards and raisins. Where is Mr. Vallejo? Oh, he's already been gone. He talked about raisins. My second, and this is, I mean, after you hear this one, you're like, what could possibly be first? Again, we're going to go back to that whole milk thing. This is a New Deal program, and I actually couldn't even memorize the stupidity on this one. So I printed out the quote. Now, what the federal government decided to create one of those, again, broken window programs where the government will come and confiscate your crop of raisins. And this is, by the way, still happening today. This has not gone away. And I'll tell you some of the numbers, and it's astonishing. They confiscate your crop of raisins, don't compensate you, and then they sell your raisins at subsidied prices overseas to further impoverish the third world, and then deal them out freely to schools and school boards for lunch programs. Not a fan of raisins. I probably wouldn't eat them if they gave it to me, but still. Anyone want to guess what number and percent of the U.S. raisin crop is confiscated every year? 40%? 1 year got up to 53. On average, it's a quarter. 25% of the raisin crop in California, at least, those are the numbers I could find, are confiscated every year. And I want to explain why. Someone took them to court because he didn't pay, or he didn't give. He sold his raisins at market. He was a new buyer. He was not aware. They fined him. I want to say the name of this department because, again, you would totally want to have dinner with the head of this thing. The Code of Federal Regulations to Stabilize Market Prices, the Agriculture Administration Act 1933 gives us the permission to create the Act, Successor to the Agricultural Marketing Act, the Raisin Administration, or Administration Committee. Raisin Administration Committee. Raisin Administration Committee fined him $1,000 a day for 270 days. He racked up a $250,000 bill for having sold the stuff he grew on his land. Now, the opinion on this, you again are going to love this because they brought a case against this, saying it violates my Fifth Amendment. You're taking my property without just compensation. In December, and this is of, by the way, the olden days of 2004, the federal court claims ruled against the farmers. They knew about the program when they got into the business, explained Judge Leto. This is a federal official. This is someone who was appointed to this office, said this about a citizen who he's supposed to be serving. And in being forced to give up a portion of their crop, they are paying an admission fee or a toll, admittedly a steep one, for marketing raisins. The government does not force plaintiffs to grow raisins or to market the raisins. It is merely required that if they grow and market raisins, then passing title to their reserve tonnage raisins to the government is therefore an admissions ticket. It's like when the robber doesn't rob you, you owe him something. So what could be stupider than that? What could be the stupidest law I could come across? Well, we need only go to Chico, California. And if some of you know what I'm going to say next, then the laughter should have commenced. Chico, California, in order to make a bold, brash political statement to the powers that be, namely Soviet Russia and the United States of America under President Ronald Reagan, passed something under their Public Peace, Safety, and Morals section of their municipal code, Title IX. Not Title IX like women and male gender equality in schools, but in municipal code of Chico State, or Chico, California, Title IX, Chapter 60, Section 3. I'm going to read this to you. No person shall produce, test, maintain, or store within the city a nuclear weapon. Components of a nuclear weapon delivery system, or component of a nuclear weapon delivery system, or shall be subject to a fine of $500. If you detonate a nuclear weapon in the city of Chico, say you're that terrorist, you just get off the boat. You've got your container ship full of nuclear material, it's ready to go, 90% enriched, it's got the core shaped and everything, and you're like, oh man, I'm supposed to go to San Francisco, but I just got to detonate here. You could potentially bankrupt what's left of your organization. That $500, you just spent $10 million on a weapon, you probably don't have much in the bank. And then you'll have to apply for a federal loan program to continue your atomic energies research. All right, so this is potentially where I open myself up to public embarrassment. There's a wonderful video. You already know what I'm doing, aren't you? Yeah. There's a video on YouTube, and it was done by Russ Robert. You may have seen him on like Glenn Beck or things like that. He is an economist, a PhD, of course, and he does a lot of different educational things. And what he really likes is stories about economics, stuff that teaches you. One thing that I learned from him, which I thought was fascinating. Milton Friedman also did the same story. It was a story about after the war in Western Berlin, the Free Side. Where we enacted the Marshall Plan, and because it was under Truman, we, of course, engaged in price controls to help the local economy of Berlin. Well, their dollar and the value of all of their currency became just absolutely worthless. No one trusted it, because prices needed to fluctuate, things needed to reach equilibrium. People just weren't willing to make transactions like that. And so they created their own sub-market, a sub-market where cigarettes sufficed for small transactions, and bottles of cognac sufficed for large transactions. They never drank them, they didn't really smoke them, but they had a value, they had some sort of system. But that was the sort of stuff that he told to try to explain how people deal with economic situations. Something else he wrote, which we talked about earlier, is Keynes and Hayek. He hates how Hayek has been pushed to the back of the room. The free market economist, the Austrian. Actually, Hayek was the guy that basically lost Churchill the election after the war. It's hard to believe that Churchill, known as the greatest of all Britons, lost, is because he was touting around the road to serfdom. And his opponent kept saying, Friedrich von Hayek wrote this. This is after they fought the war. And he looks like a loon when Winston Churchill's saying, you must worry about all these new government entities that we're creating. And you had millions upon millions of Britons returning back to their homeland after just having government jobs, completely secure employment, having gone through a long recession and depression, saying, no, we want a state-run coal system. We want state-run healthcare. We want state-run this. We want state-run that. It was a big turning point. Friedrich von Hayek, unfortunately, went into a sort of crisis period after that. And for a long time, decades, you couldn't even get professorships at some things. He went from Cambridge, watching, actually with Keynes, Hayek and Keynes, both on the roof of Cambridge University, doing air watch and air patrol and during the raids. But couldn't even find professorships after that. And then finally, near the end of his life, in the late 70s, finally got his Nobel Prize in Economics. Margaret Thatcher, when she was elected, finally invited him over to number 9 over in Britain. And Reagan also wrote him a very nice letter, and Friedrich sort of died a happy man, knowing his policies would be more so enacted than they had ever been. And he was finally getting the recognition only after stagflation, where you say, well, inflation's going up and employment's staying stagnant. What's going on here, Keynes? Of course, Keynes is gone at this point to explain himself, but he had many apologists. So anyways, this is a video that they created, and it has millions upon millions of views, and it's called Keynes and Hayek Second Round. Their first round, they argue about everything. The second round, they argue about the recession. And they go back and forth about what to do, and about stimulus spending and whatever. And so I want to read it like a poem, but I know it's going to turn into a sort of really lame rap. Just go with it. Encourage me, please. Check this out. So I'm going to do everything from Hayek's position, and here it goes. And you guys get to be Keynes. How wonderful is that? So just pretend you want to control my life and direct my financial choices.